The complexity of identity. Who am I? The concept of identity is a complex one, shaped by individual characteristics, family dynamics, historical factors, and social and political context. Who am I? The answer depends in large part on who the world around me says I am. Who do my parents say I am? Who do my peers say I am? What message is reflected back to me in the faces and voices of my teachers, my neighbors, store clerks? What do I learn from the media about myself? How am I representing the cultural images around me? Or am I missing from the picture altogether? As social scientist Charles Cooley pointed out long ago, other people are the mirror in which we see ourselves. This looking glass self is not a flat one-dimensional reflection, but multidimensional. Because the focus of this book is racial identity in the United States, race is highlighted in these pages. Yet how one's racial identity is experienced will be mediated by other dimensions of oneself. Male or female, young or old, wealthy, middle class or poor, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or heterosexual, able-bodied or with disabilities, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, or atheist. Abigail Stewart and Joseph Healy's research on the impact of historical periods on personality development raises the question, who is my cohort group? Am I a child of the Depression, a survivor of World War II, the Holocaust, the U.S. internment of Japanese Americans, a product of the segregation of the 1940s and 50s, or a beneficiary of the Civil Rights era? Did I serve in the Vietnam War? Am I a refugee of it? Did I come of age during the conservatism of the Reagan years? Did I ride the wave of the women's movement? Was I born before or after Stonewall and the emergence of gay activism? What historical events have shaped my thinking? What has my social context been? Was I surrounded by people like myself, or was I part of a minority in my community? Did I grow up speaking standard English at home, or another language or dialect? Did I live in a rural county, an urban neighborhood, a sprawling suburb, or on a reservation? Who I am, or say I am, is a product of these and many other factors. Erik Erikson, the psychoanalytical theorist who coined the term identity crisis, introduced the notion that the social, cultural, and historical context is the ground in which individual identity is embedded. Acknowledging the complexity of identity as a concept, Erikson writes, "We deal with a process located in the core of the individual, and yet also in the core of his communal culture. In psychological terms, identity formation employs a process of simultaneous reflection and observation, a process taking place on all levels of mental functioning by which the individual judges himself in the light of what he perceives to be the way in which others judge him in comparison to themselves and to a typology significant to them, while he judges their way of judging him in the light of how he perceives himself in comparison to them and to types that have become relevant to him. This process is luckily and necessarily, for the most part, unconscious, except where inner conditions and outer circumstances combine to aggravate a painful or elated identity consciousness." Triggered by the biological changes associated with puberty, the maturation of cognitive abilities, and changing societal expectations, this process of simultaneous reflection and observation, the self-creation of one's identity, is commonly experienced in the United States and other Western societies during the period of adolescence. Though the foundation of identity is laid in the experiences of childhood, younger children lack the physical and cognitive development needed to reflect on the self in this abstract way. The adolescent capacity for self-reflection and resulting self-consciousness allows one to ask, who am I now? Who was I before? Who will I become? The answer to these questions will influence choices about who one's romantic partners will be, what type of work we will do, where one will live, and what belief system one will embrace. Choices made in adolescence ripple throughout the lifespan. Who am I? Multiple identities. Integrating one's past, present, and future into a cohesive, unified sense of self is a complex task that begins in adolescence and continues for a lifetime. The complexity of identity is made clear in a collection of autobiographical essays about racial identity called Names We Call Home. The multiracial, multi-ethnic group of contributors narrate life stories highlighting the intersections of gender, class, religion, sexuality, race, and historical circumstances, and illustrating that people's multiple identifications defy neat racial divisions and unidimensional political alliances. My students' autobiographical narratives point to a similar complexity, but the less developed narratives of the late adolescence that I teach highlight the fact that our awareness of the complexity of our own identity develops over time. The salience of particular aspects of our identity varies at different moments in our lives. The process of integrating the component parts of our self-definition is indeed a lifelong journey. Which parts of our identity capture our attention first? While there are surely idiosyncratic responses to this question, a classroom exercise I regularly use with my psychology students reveals a telling pattern. I ask my students to complete the sentence, "I am blank," using as many descriptors as they can think of in 60 seconds. All kinds of trait descriptors are used: friendly, shy, assertive, intelligent, honest, and so on. But over the years I have noticed something else. Students of color usually mention their racial or ethnic group. For instance, I am black, Puerto Rican, Korean American. White students who have grown up in strong ethnic enclaves occasionally mention being Irish or Italian, but in general, white students rarely mention being white. When I use this exercise in coeducational settings, I notice a similar pattern in terms of gender, religion, and sexuality. Women usually mention being female, while men don't usually mention their maleness. Jewish students often say they are Jews, while mainline Protestants rarely mention their religious identification. A student who is comfortable reviewing it publicly may mention being gay, lesbian, or bisexual. Though I know most of my students are heterosexual, it is very unusual for anyone to include their heterosexuality on their list. Common across these examples is that in the areas where a person is a member of a dominant or advantaged social group, the category is usually not mentioned. That element of their identity is so taken for granted by them that it goes without comment. It is taken for granted by them because it is taken for granted by the dominant culture. In Ericksonian terms, their inner experience and outer circumstances are in harmony with one another, and the image reflected by others is similar to the image within. In the absence of dissonance, this dimension of identity escapes conscious attention. The parts of our identity that do capture our attention are those that other people notice and that reflect back to us. The aspect of identity that is the target of others' attention and subsequently of our own often is that which sets us apart as exceptional or other in their eyes. In my life, I have been perceived as both a precocious child who began to read at age 3. I stood out among my peers because of my reading ability. This gifted dimension of my identity was regularly commented upon by teachers and classmates alike and quickly became part of my self-definition. But I was also distinguished by being the only black student in the class, and other, a fact I grew increasingly aware of as I got older. While there may be countless ways one might be defined as exceptional, there are at least 7 categories of otherness commonly experienced in U.S. society. People are commonly defined as other on the basis of race or ethnicity, gender, religion, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, age, and physical or mental ability. Each of these categories has a form of oppression associated with it: racism, sexism, religious oppression, anti-Semitism, heterosexism, classism, ageism, and ableism, respectively. In each case, there is a group considered dominant, systematically advantaged by the society because of group membership, and a group considered subordinate or targeted, systematically disadvantaged. When we think about our multiple identities, most of us will find that we are both dominant and targeted at the same time. But it is the targeted identities that hold our attention and the dominant identities that go unexamined. In her essay, Age, Race, Class, and Sex, Women Redefining Difference, Audre Lorde captured the tensions between dominant and targeted identities coexisting in one individual. This self-described 49-year-old black lesbian feminist socialist mother of 2 wrote, "Somewhere on the edge of consciousness there is what I call a mythical norm, which each one of us within our heart knows that is not me. In America, this norm is usually defined as white, thin, male, young, heterosexual, Christian, and financially secure. It is with this mythical norm that the trappings of power reside within society. Those of us who stand outside that power often identify one way in which we are different, and we assume that to be the primary cause of all oppression, forgetting other distortions around difference, some of which we ourselves may be practicing. Even as I focus on race and racism in my own writing and teaching, it is helpful to remind myself and my students of the other distortions around difference that I and they may be practicing. It is an especially useful way of generating empathy for our mutual learning process. If I am impatient with a white woman for not recognizing her white privilege, it may be useful for me to remember how much of my life I spent oblivious to the fact of the daily advantages I receive simply because I am heterosexual, or the ways in which I may take my class privilege